The crystalline spires of the Galactic Council Station stretched toward the star-filled void, their surfaces gleaming with an ethereal light that made the entire structure appear to float like a dream against the cosmic backdrop. Lieutenant Commander James Rivera stood at the observation deck's edge, watching the slow rotation of the massive diplomatic hub that housed representatives from dozens of civilizations. His reflection stared back from the transparent aluminum, a man of 31, years with weathered features that spoke of frontier worlds and difficult negotiations, dark hair touched with premature silver at the temples, and brown eyes that had seen both the wonder and the cruelty the galaxy could offer. James had served as a xenolinguist and cultural specialist for the past 8 years, facilitating first contact protocols and resolving disputes between human colonies and alien neighbors. He'd learned 17 different languages, mastered the subtle art of interspecies diplomacy, and earned a reputation for finding common ground where others saw only differences. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the summons that had brought him here. The message had been brief and formal. Lieutenant Commander Rivera, your presence is required for a matter of critical importance to humanity's application for Galactic Alliance membership. Report to Council Chamber 7 immediately upon arrival. The sender had been Admiral Thane Mordak of the Zaphirian Empire, a name that carried weight throughout known space. The Zaphirians controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy's trade routes and boasted military technology that made most other species think twice before challenging them. They were also notoriously difficult to work with, proud, hierarchical, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. James had studied their culture extensively but had never dealt with them directly. The fact that they had specifically requested him was both flattering and deeply concerning. As he made his way through the station's corridors, James noticed how other species representatives seemed to give the Zaphirian delegation areas a wide berth. The few humans he passed offered him encouraging nods, but he could see the worry in their eyes. Everyone knew how much was riding on humanity's alliance application. Earth's resources were stretched thin, their expansion into space limited by their relatively primitive technology, and hostile forces in the outer rim made independent survival increasingly difficult. Council Chamber 7 was smaller than James had expected, its walls covered in holographic displays showing the current political map of the galaxy. The Zaphirian delegation sat in their traditional formation, a perfect triangle that emphasized their rigid social hierarchy. At the apex sat Admiral Mordak himself, his crystalline blue skin catching the room's light and fracturing it into rainbow patterns. His features were sharp and angular, with eyes like polished sapphires that seemed to look straight through James to some invisible point beyond. Lieutenant Commander Rivera, the Admiral's voice carried the musical quality, common to his species, but there was nothing pleasant about his tone. How good of you to join us, please sit. James took the indicated chair, noting how it was positioned lower than the Zaphirian seats, a subtle but clear statement about his relative status in their eyes. Admiral Mordak, honored council members, I'm here as requested, though I confess I'm uncertain about the nature of this assignment. Uncertainty is natural for your species, interjected Counselor Velnara, a female Zaphirian whose silver robes and intricate facial markings indicated noble birth. It stems from your chaotic social structures and lack of proper hierarchy. Which brings us to why you're here. Admiral Mordak leaned forward slightly. Humanity seeks membership in our alliance, yet your species remains unproven. You are young, impulsive, and lack the sophistication necessary for civilized galactic society. Your technology is primitive, your diplomacy clumsy, and your understanding of proper social order is virtually non-existent. James bit back his first response, instead asking calmly, what would you require as proof of our worthiness? The Admiral's smile was sharp as a blade. An excellent question. We have devised a test that will demonstrate whether humans possess the most essential quality for Alliance membership, the ability to bring order from chaos, to transform the wild into the civilized. A holographic image materialized in the center of the chamber, a young Zaphirian female with features that were undeniably beautiful, but carried an edge of defiance that was visible even in the static projection. Her skin held the same crystalline quality as the others, but with a subtle iridescent sheen that shifted between blue and silver. Her eyes were a striking violet color, and her long hair seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Princess Cathara, Feltar, Counselor Velnara said, her tone mixing pride and frustration. My niece, heir to one of the most powerful houses in the Empire, and the most difficult individual any of us have ever encountered. Difficult how? James asked, studying the image. In the past 5 years, Admiral Mordak continued, the princess has driven away 19 mentors, advisors, and teachers. She has refused to accept proper training in etiquette, protocol, or social behavior. She argues with her betters, questions established traditions, and has shown a disturbing tendency toward independence. The way he said the last word made it sound like a disease. She is brilliant, Counselor Velnara admitted grudgingly, perhaps too much so for her own good. She speaks 12 languages, has mastered advanced mathematics and physics, and possesses an eidetic memory. But she uses these gifts to cause disruption rather than to serve her proper role in society. James was beginning to form a picture, and he wasn't sure he liked where this was heading. And you want me to what exactly? Reform her, Admiral Mordak said simply. Teach her proper behavior, respect for authority, and acceptance of her place in the natural order. You have 6 months to succeed where our finest minds have failed. And if I succeed, humanity receives immediate full alliance membership, with all the privileges, protections, and opportunities that entails. The Admiral paused for effect. When you fail, however, your species' application will be permanently rejected. Humanity will be barred from civilized space and left to face the galaxy's dangers alone. The weight of entire worlds seemed to settle on James's shoulders. He thought of Earth's overcrowded cities, the struggling colonies on the rim worlds, the constant threat from raiders and hostile alien factions. Alliance membership wasn't just about prestige, it was about survival. I should mention, Counselor Velnara added with false sweetness, that the princess can be volatile when displeased. Her last mentor was hospitalized after she threw him across the room using telekinetic abilities. The one before that suffered what I believe you humans call a complete nervous breakdown. Telekinetic? James raised an eyebrow. A minor talent among our nobility. Admiral Mordak waved dismissively. Nothing that proper discipline cannot control. The real challenge lies in her attitude, not her abilities. James studied the hologram, again noting details he'd missed before. The princess's posture suggested confidence rather than arrogance, and there was intelligence in those violet eyes that went beyond mere cleverness. Something about her expression reminded him of caged predators he'd seen, dangerous not because they were evil, but because they refused to accept captivity. What methods have previous mentors used, he asked. Traditional approaches, naturally. Clear hierarchies, firm discipline, appropriate consequences for improper behavior. The standard techniques for educating nobility. The clinical way they described what sounded like systematic attempts to break someone's spirit made James's stomach tighten, but he kept his expression neutral. And what specifically does the princess object to about these methods? Admiral Mordak's eyes narrowed dangerously. That is not your concern, Lieutenant Commander. Your task is to make her compliant and civilized, not to question time-tested Zaphirian traditions. The question is, do you accept this challenge, or shall we inform the Galactic Council that humanity lacks the courage to face difficult situations? James met the Admiral's gaze steadily. In that moment, he understood that this was more than just a test, it was a trap. The Zaphirians expected him to fail, probably wanted him to fail. They were offering humanity a chance they had no intention of honoring, using their problem princess as an excuse to justify rejection. But James had spent years studying alien cultures, and he'd learned that sometimes the greatest diplomatic victories came from understanding what others couldn't, or wouldn't see. The princess in the hologram didn't look like someone who needed to be tamed. She looked like someone who had been fighting for her right to exist as herself, rather than as others expected her to be. I accept, he said quietly. When do I meet? The princess? Admiral Mordak's smile was triumphant and cold. Immediately. She's waiting for you now. The transport shuttle descended through Zephyr Prime's crystalline atmosphere, its hull shimmering as it passed through layers of ionized particles that gave the planet's sky its famous opalescent glow. James pressed his face to the viewport, watching as the Zaphirian capital city emerged from the clouds like a fever dream made manifest. Spires of living crystal twisted skyward, their surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served as both art and communication. Gardens of exotic flora cascaded down the sides of buildings in impossible spirals, defying gravity through some technology James couldn't begin to understand. The Imperial Palace dominated the city's heart, a massive structure that seemed to grow directly from the planet's crust, its walls seamlessly blending crystal and metal into forms that hurt to look at directly. As the shuttle settled onto a landing platform carved from a single enormous gemstone, James felt the weight of his mission settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Admiral Mordak had provided him with minimal briefing materials during the journey. Princess Kythera was 24 standard years old, equivalent to early 20s in human development. She was third in line for the imperial throne, possessed of considerable telekinetic abilities, and had been engaged 7 times to various noble houses, each engagement ending in scandal when she publicly humiliated her intended partners. The Tower files painted a picture of a spoiled, violent, and thoroughly unmanageable young woman who took pleasure in defying authority. But James had learned to read between the lines. The violent incidents seemed to involve her defending servants from abuse. Her public humiliations of suitors appeared to expose their corruption or cruelty. And her defiance of authority often coincided with her questioning policies that seemed designed to oppress the lower castes. Either the princess was remarkably lucky in her choice of targets, or there was more to her story than the official reports suggested. The palace corridors were a maze of flowing curves and impossible angles, their walls alive with shifting patterns of light that responded to the footsteps of passers-by. James's escort, a stern-faced noble named Commander Velthak, maintained a disapproving silence as they walked deeper into the structure. The few servants they passed kept their eyes downcast, but James noticed how some of them glanced at him, with something that might have been hope. "The princess's quarters are in the disciplinary wing," Commander Velthak explained as they approached a section of the palace where the beautiful flowing architecture gave way to harsh, angular lines. "She has been confined there since her latest incident." "What kind of incident?" James asked, though he suspected he wouldn't get a straight answer. "She destroyed a punishment chamber after discovering certain irregularities in its use," the commander replied stiffly. "The damage required 3 days to repair." They stopped before a door that looked more like a prison cell than royal quarters. Heavy crystal barriers hummed with energy, and warning symbols in Zaphirian script covered every surface. Commander Velthak placed his hand on a scanner, and the barriers dissolved with a musical chime. "Princess Kythera," he announced formally, "your new mentor has arrived. Lieutenant Commander James Rivera of the Human Diplomatic Corps." James stepped through the doorway and immediately understood why everyone was so afraid of her. Princess Kythera Veltar stood with her back to them at the room's far end, gazing out through a crystal window at the city below. She was taller than he'd expected, nearly matching his own height, with the lithe, graceful build of a natural athlete. Her iridescent skin seemed to glow with its own inner light, shifting between deep blue and silver as she moved. Her hair fell in waves of liquid starlight to her waist, and when she turned to face them, her violet eyes held the focused intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. But it wasn't her beauty or obvious physical power that made James's breath catch. It was the intelligence burning behind those eyes, sharp as a laser and twice as dangerous. This was not a spoiled child or a mindless rebel. This was someone who had analyzed every angle, considered every possibility, and chosen her battles with careful precision. "Another mentor," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality as other Zaphirians, but with an edge of steel beneath the melody. How delightfully predictable. "Tell me, Commander Velthak, did this one volunteer for the position, or was he simply the most expendable member of his species?" Commander Velthak's jaw tightened. "The human requested this assignment, Princess. He believes he can succeed where others have failed." Kythera's laugh was like silver bells with poison in their tone. How wonderfully naive. "Very well, Commander. You may leave us. I promise to try not to break this one too quickly. I'd hate to deprive myself of entertainment so soon. As the door sealed behind the departing commander, Kythera circled James slowly, her movements fluid and predatory. So, Lieutenant Commander Rivera, what makes you think you can accomplish what 19 others could not? Are humans particularly gifted at breaking the spirits of unwilling students? James met her gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. I'm not here to break anyone's spirit, Princess. I'm here to understand why a brilliant young woman has chosen to wage war against her own people. The circling stopped abruptly. For just a moment, something flickered in those violet eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. Understand? She repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. How refreshingly different. Most of my mentors begin with threats or demonstrations of their authority. I'm not most mentors, James replied calmly, and frankly, from what I've observed so far, threatening you would be both pointless and counterproductive. Kythera moved closer, studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. You're not what I expected, she admitted. Most humans I've encountered have been crude, loud, unrefined. You seem almost civilized. Thank you, I think, James said dryly. You're not what I expected either. Oh, and what did you expect, based on the reports? A spoiled brat throwing tantrums because she couldn't have her way. James paused, watching her reaction. What I see is someone who's been fighting a losing battle for so long that everyone's forgotten what she was originally fighting for. The princess went very still. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more dangerous. Careful, human, you're beginning to sound almost perceptive. That could be hazardous to your health in this place. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Kythera moved to a sitting area furnished with furniture that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Sit if you wish. We might as well observe the pretense of civilized conversation before this inevitably deteriorates into another futile attempt at reforming me. James took the offered seat, noting how the crystal furniture molded itself to his form. What if I told you I'm not interested in reforming you? I'd say you're either lying or you don't understand your assignment. My assignment is to help you find a way to coexist peacefully with your society. That doesn't necessarily mean changing who you are to fit their expectations. Kythera stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You realize that such talk borders on sedition? The natural order is not subject to negotiation, human. There are rulers and ruled, superiors and inferiors. That is the way of civilization. According to whom? According to thousands of years of Zaphirian culture and tradition. And who benefits from those traditions? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Kythera's eyes narrowed, but James could see the wheels turning behind them. She was considering possibilities that others had probably forbidden her to contemplate. You're trying to manipulate me, she said finally. I'm trying to have a conversation with you. When was the last time someone asked for your opinion rather than demanding your compliance? Something cracked in her composed facade, just for an instant, but James caught it. Pain, loneliness, and a desperate hunger for genuine human connection. You don't know what you're asking, she whispered. The things I could tell you, the things I've seen, they would shatter your naive human idealism. Try me. Kythera stood abruptly, moving back to the window. Her reflection in the crystal was ethereal, almost ghostly. Do you know what happened to my last mentor, human? The real story, not the sanitized version they fed you? Tell me. Lord Velkin was tasked with teaching me proper feminine submission. His methods included starvation, sensory deprivation, and what your people might call psychological torture. When I refused to break, he escalated to physical punishment. Her voice remained steady, but James could see her hands trembling. I endured it for weeks, hoping that compliance would end the abuse. It only made him more creative. James felt a cold anger building in his chest. What happened? I threw him through a reinforced crystal wall, she said simply. He survived. Barely. The official report blamed my uncontrolled violent tendencies. No mention was made of what drove me to violence in the first place. The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the palace's energy systems. James studied Cathara's profile, seeing past the dangerous beauty to the wounded young woman beneath. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That should never have happened to you." She turned sharply, surprise evident in her features. "Sorry? You're apologizing to me? Someone should. What was done to you was wrong, regardless of the justification." For the first time since he'd entered the room, Cathara seemed truly off balance. She stared at him as if he were some exotic creature she couldn't classify. "You're either the most sophisticated manipulator I've ever encountered," she said slowly, "or you're genuinely different from the others. There's one way to find out." "Which is?" James stood and moved toward the door. "Give me a chance to prove it. Not as your mentor, not as someone trying to change you, but as someone who wants to understand who you really are beneath all the armor you've built." Cathara watched him go, her expression cycling through confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been hope. "Where are you going?" "To my quarters. I assume you know where to find me when you're ready to talk." He paused at the door. "And Princess? Next time we meet, it will be because you chose to seek me out, not because someone ordered you to endure my presence." As the crystal barriers reformed behind him, James could feel her stare burning into his back. He'd taken a massive gamble, showing vulnerability instead of strength, offering partnership instead of dominance. In human cultures, such an approach might work. With an alien psychology shaped by thousands of years of rigid hierarchy, it could backfire spectacularly. But something in those violet eyes told him that Princess Cathara Veltar was far more human than her own people realized, and that might be the key to saving both their species. 3 days passed before Cathara came to him. James had spent the time exploring the sections of the palace open to him, studying Zaphirian art and architecture, and learning what he could about their society from carefully worded conversations with servants and minor nobles. What he discovered painted a picture of a civilization built on rigid castes and absolute obedience, where questioning authority was considered a form of mental illness and individual expression was ruthlessly suppressed. He was in the palace's botanical gardens sketching the impossible geometries of a flowering crystal tree when she found him. The soft sound of footsteps on the pathway made him look up to see Cathara approaching, moving with the fluid grace of a dancer or a warrior. She had abandoned the formal robes he'd seen her in before, instead wearing a simple tunic and leggings. That highlighted her athletic build while allowing freedom of movement. "You've been patient," she observed, settling onto the stone bench beside him without invitation. "Most of my mentors would have demanded my presence within hours." "Most of your mentors were focused on asserting their authority," James replied, closing his sketchbook. "I'm more interested in earning your trust." Trust. Cathara tested the word as if it were unfamiliar. An interesting concept. In Zaphirian society, trust is considered a weakness, a failure to properly assess the self-interest of others. "What do you consider it?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the play of light through the crystal leaves above them. "A luxury I can't afford," she said finally. "Trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability in this place is a death sentence." "Even here?" James gestured to the garden around them, where impossible flowers bloomed in defiance of several natural laws. "This seems like a place built for beauty, not conflict. Beauty can be the cruelest deception of all." Cathara's voice carried a bitter note. "This garden was designed by my grandmother, Princess Velzia. She believed that art could transcend political boundaries, that beauty could unite hearts across species and castes. She was executed as a traitor when I was 7 years old." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. For creating gardens? For daring to suggest that the lower castes possessed the capacity to appreciate beauty? Her gardens had become meeting places where servants and nobles might encounter each other, as equals if only for a moment. The Imperial Council declared such interactions a corruption of the natural order. She stood and moved to one of the flowering trees, her fingers tracing patterns in the crystalline bark. "They kept the gardens because they were too beautiful to destroy. but they forbade anyone below the noble caste from entering. Beauty preserved, but empty of the joy that gave it meaning. Is that why you fight them? James asked quietly. To honor her memory. Kithara's laugh was hollow. Honor? No, human. I fight because I've seen what happens when no one does. I've watched servants beaten for looking directly at their betters. I've seen children separated from their parents because their breeding stock was needed elsewhere. I've witnessed the slow murder of every spark of creativity and independence in our society, all justified by the sacred principles of order and hierarchy. She turned back to face him, and James was struck by the pain in her violet eyes. You asked what I was fighting for. Originally, I was fighting for the right of people to be people, rather than property. But I've been fighting so long that I've forgotten what victory would even look like. James stood and moved closer, careful not to invade her personal space. What would you change if you had the power? Everything, she said without hesitation. The caste system, the breeding programs, the prohibition on intercaste relationships, the restrictions on education and movement. I would tear down every structure that treats thinking beings as objects to be owned and used. That's not reform, James observed. That's revolution. Yes, and that's why I can never be allowed to inherit any real power. My family tolerates me because my bloodline is too pure to waste, but they'll never permit me to actually rule. The best I can hope for is to be married off to some minor noble who can keep me properly subdued. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. James found himself wanting to comfort her, to offer some hope or solution, but he sensed that empty platitudes would only drive her away. What if there was another option? He asked instead. Such as? What if you could create change without destroying everything? What if you could find allies who shared your vision? Kithara moved closer, studying his face intently. You're thinking of your own species, aren't you? Humanity's reputation for flexibility in social structures, among other things. But I'm also thinking of people within your own society who might be ready for change if someone gave them hope, that it was possible. Hope is a dangerous commodity here, James. The use of his given name felt intimate, personal in a way that surprised him. Hope inspires people to take risks, and risks lead to punishment. I've seen too many good people broken for the crime of believing things could be better. And I've seen what happens when good people stop believing in change entirely. James, I replied. Stagnation, decay, and eventually collapse. No society can survive indefinitely when it suppresses the very qualities that make it worth preserving. They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the flecks of silver in her violet eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her crystalline skin. The air between them seemed charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. You're not like them, Kithara said softly. The others who came before. They saw me as a problem to be solved, a wild animal to be tamed. You see me as a person, James finished. A brilliant, complex, fascinating person who happens to disagree with the way her world is organized. Something shifted in her expression. A wall coming down, a mask falling away. For the first time since he'd met her, James glimpsed the woman. Kithara might have been in a different world, free from the constant need to defend herself against those who would break her spirit. James, she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer or a confession. What you're suggesting, it's not just dangerous for me. If they discover that you're encouraging revolutionary thinking, then we'll have to be careful, he said, reaching out to touch her hand. Her skin was warm despite its crystalline appearance, and he felt a slight electric tingle at the contact. But Kithara, I didn't come here to make you compliant. I came here to help you find a way to be yourself in a world that's forgotten how to value individuality. She stared down at their joined hands, her expression cycling through wonder, fear, and something deeper. No one has ever... She stopped, shaking her head. I don't know how to do this, James. I don't know how to trust, how to hope, how to believe that things could be different. Then let me teach you, he said, stepping closer. Not because it's my assignment, but because I think the galaxy would be a much brighter place with Princess Kythera Veltar, free to be who she was meant to be. The space between them disappeared as she moved into his arms, her body fitting against his with surprising naturalness. When she looked up at him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This is madness," she breathed. "Even contemplating what you're suggesting, it could destroy us both." "Some things are worth the risk," James replied. And then he was kissing her. Her response was immediate and electric, her arms coming up to circle his neck as she pressed against him with desperate hunger. The kiss deepened, became something fierce and claiming, as if they were both trying to pour years of loneliness and frustration into a single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Kythera's skin had shifted to a deeper blue, and her eyes seemed to glow with their own inner light. "James," she whispered against his lips, "if we do this, if we try to change things, there will be no going back." "I know," he said, brushing a strand of starlight hair from her face. "Are you ready for that?" Her smile was radiant and terrible, full of hope and determination and the kind of dangerous beauty that could start wars or end them. "With you, I think I might be ready for anything." As they kissed again beneath the crystal trees, neither of them noticed the small surveillance device hidden among the impossible flowers, faithfully recording everything for the Imperial Council's review. The revelation came during what should have been a routine cultural exchange session. James had been working with Kythera for 3 weeks, their relationship evolving from tentative alliance to genuine partnership to something deeper and more dangerous than either had anticipated. They met daily in the palace's restricted archives, ostensibly studying historical precedents for diplomatic relations, but actually planning a careful campaign of social change. They were reviewing records of past interspecies negotiations when Kythera suddenly went rigid, her violet eyes fixed on a particular document. Her skin had shifted to a pale, almost translucent blue, a sign of extreme distress that James had learned to recognize. "What is it?" he asked, moving to look over her shoulder at the holographic display. "The Kalos Accord," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I remember my grandmother mentioning it once, but the records were supposed to be sealed." James scanned the document, his translation software struggling with the archaic Zaphirian script. What he could make out painted a disturbing picture. An agreement between the Zaphirian Empire and the Kalos Federation, signed nearly 50 years ago, establishing terms for the transfer of genetic material for breeding optimization. "Kythera, what exactly am I looking at?" Her hands were shaking as she manipulated the holographic controls, calling up related documents. "Proof," she said bitterly. "Proof of everything I suspected but could never confirm. The breeding programs, the caste restrictions, the prohibition on intercaste relationships. None of it is about preserving Zaphirian purity. It's about maintaining a supply of genetically diverse specimens for our alien allies." More documents materialized in the air around them, each one more damning than the last. Trade agreements that treated Zaphirian citizens as commodity exports, medical records detailing forced genetic modifications, transportation manifests listing sentient beings alongside industrial equipment. "They're selling our people," Kythera breathed, her skin now flickering between blue and silver in rapid, agitated patterns. "The lower castes, the servants, the ones deemed genetically redundant, they're being shipped off-world as breeding stock or worse." James felt sick. "How long has this been going on?" "Decades, maybe longer." She called up a shipping schedule, and James saw names he recognized, servants from the palace, young people who had simply been reassigned to other duties. And the worst part? The Imperial Council justifies it as maintaining genetic diversity for the good of the species. They've convinced everyone that this is noble sacrifice, that the lower castes should be honored to serve in this way. A new document appeared, and Kythera's breath caught. It was a proposal, marked with the Imperial seal, detailing plans for her own future. The clinical language described her optimal reproductive potential and valuable genetic markers, recommending Her placement with a Kalos breeding facility, after a suitable period of behavioral conditioning. "They never intended to reform me," she said, her voice hollow with shock. "They were just waiting for someone to break me down enough to make transport feasible." James pulled her against him, feeling the tremors running through her body. "We have to expose this. If the Galactic Council knew what was really happening—" "The Galactic Council is complicit," Kithara interrupted, calling up another document. "Look at the signatures on the Kalos Accord. Admiral Mordak, Councillor Velnara, even representatives from species I thought were our allies. They all knew. They all approved." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. James stared at the evidence floating around them, understanding finally why Kithara had fought so hard against a system that seemed designed to destroy everything she valued. "What do we do?" he asked. Kithara was quiet for a long moment, her expression cycling through despair, rage, and finally settling into something cold and determined. "We fight back. Not with protests or petitions or careful diplomatic maneuvering. We expose them publicly, dramatically, in a way that can't be covered up or explained away." The alliance ceremony, James realized, when humanity's membership is being decided. If we could present this evidence, then it would shatter more than just the Zaphirian Empire's reputation, Kithara finished. It would force the entire Galactic Council to confront their complicity in systematic slavery and genocide. They spent the next hour copying files, encrypting data, and preparing evidence packages for multiple recipients. Kithara's fingers flew over the controls with desperate efficiency, her entire being focused on the task of preserving the truth. "There," she said finally, sealing the last data packet. "Copies have been sent to independent journalists, human colonial authorities, and several species not directly involved in the conspiracy. Even if they try to silence us, the truth will survive." James took her hands in his, feeling the electric tingle that had become familiar and precious to him. "You know what this means, don't you? Once we do this, there's no protection for you, no royal privilege, no diplomatic immunity. They'll come after you with everything they have." "I know." Her smile was fierce and beautiful. "But for the first time in my life, I'll be fighting for something instead of just against something. I'll be fighting for the chance to build the world my grandmother dreamed of." A soft chime indicated someone approaching the archive entrance. They had perhaps 30 seconds before whoever it was arrived, 30 seconds to make a decision that would reshape both their lives. "James," Kithara said urgently, "you could still complete your original mission, present me as reformed, accept humanity's alliance membership, and live safely within the system. No one would blame you for choosing your species' welfare over abstract principles." James cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the way her skin seemed to glow in response to his touch. "I didn't fall in love with abstract principles," he said. "I fell in love with a woman brave enough to fight an entire galactic conspiracy to protect people she's never met. There's no choice here, Kithara. We do this together, or not at all." The archive door began to iris open. With practiced efficiency, they cleared the holographic displays and assumed casual positions around a harmless historical text. But the tension between them remained electric, charged with the knowledge of what they were about to attempt. Commander Velthak entered, his expression suspicious. "Princess, your presence is required at the evening court session. The Imperial Council wishes to review your progress with your human mentor." "Of course they do," Kithara replied smoothly, her public mask sliding back into place. "Tell them, I'll be along shortly." As the commander departed, she turned back to James. "The ceremony is in 3 days. Are you ready to change the galaxy?" James thought of Earth, of the billions of humans counting on his success, of the comfortable lie he could tell to secure their future. Then he looked at Kithara, at the hope and determination shining in her violet eyes, and knew there was really only one answer he could give. "Let's burn it all down and build something better." Her kiss was fierce and desperate, tasting of starlight and revolution. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council Station had been transformed for the ceremony. Holographic banners representing dozens of species floated in the vast space, their colors creating a rainbow that spoke of unity and cooperation. Representatives from across known space filled the tiered seating, while the central dais held the ceremonial chairs for the major alliance powers. The air hummed with translation matrices and the soft murmur of 100 different languages. James stood at the designated position for the human delegation, wearing his dress uniform with its gleaming insignia. To any observer, he appeared, calm and confident, ready to accept humanity's entry into galactic civilization. Inside, his heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the moment that would either herald a new age of justice or destroy everything he'd worked for. Kythera occupied the place of honor beside the Zaphirian delegation, resplendent in ceremonial robes that made her look like a living constellation. Her posture was perfect, her expression serene, giving no hint of the revolutionary fire burning beneath her composed exterior. Only James could see the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers traced nervous patterns against her. Robes Admiral Mordick rose to address the assembly, his crystalline features reflecting the hall's prismatic lighting. Honored colleagues, his amplified voice carried easily through the vast space. We gather today to decide the fate of humanity's application for Alliance membership. After careful consideration and testing, the Zaphirian Empire is prepared to render our judgment. A hush fell over the assembly. James felt the weight of billions of eyes upon him, not just the physical beings present, but the countless souls on worlds throughout human space who were depending on this moment. The human species has shown potential, Admiral Mordack continued, his tone carefully neutral. However, their cultural development remains incomplete. They lack the refinement necessary for full participation in civilized galactic society. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. This wasn't the outright rejection many had expected, but it wasn't approval either. Therefore, the Admiral continued, we propose a provisional membership, subject to ongoing evaluation and guidance from established alliance powers. Humanity will be granted limited access to trade routes and protective treaties, but will remain under careful supervision until they demonstrate sufficient cultural maturity. James closed his eyes briefly. It was clever, a compromise that gave humanity some benefits while keeping them permanently subordinate, dependent on Zaphirian approval for any advancement. It would ensure Earth's survival while cementing the existing power structure for generations to come. In the viewing gallery reserved for nobility, he could see other members of the imperial family nodding approvingly. This was exactly the outcome they had planned from the beginning, just enough to appear reasonable, not enough to threaten their position. Admiral Mordack gestured toward James. Lieutenant Commander Rivera, as humanity's representative, do you accept these terms on behalf of your species? This was the moment. James could say yes, secure humanity's future, and trust that someday, somehow, his species might find a way to earn full equality. It was the safe choice, the pragmatic choice, the choice that would save lives and worlds. Instead, he looked at Kythera. She met his gaze across the vast hall, and he saw her give the slightest nod. In her violet eyes he saw courage, determination, and a love worth fighting for. With respect, Admiral, James said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, I cannot accept terms based on false premises and corrupted foundations. The murmur that ran through the assembly was louder now, confused and concerned. Admiral Mordack's expression darkened dangerously. Explain yourself, human. James activated his personal data projector, filling the air above the central dais with holographic documents. These are internal Zaphirian communications, sealed records, and trade agreements dating back nearly 50 years. They detail a systematic program of slavery, forced breeding, and genetic trafficking conducted by the Zaphirian Empire in partnership with several alliance members. The hall erupted. Representatives leaped to their feet, shouting questions and denials in a dozen languages. The translation system struggled to keep up with the cacophony. Admiral Mordack's skin had shifted to an angry red, his composure finally cracking. These are fabrications, malicious lies designed to— Are they? Cathara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She had risen from her place among the Zaphirian delegation, her ceremonial robes shimmering as she moved to the center of the dais. "Because I have additional evidence that might interest the assembly." "Princess," Counselor Velnara hissed, "return to your place immediately." "No." Kithra's voice carried a new authority, no longer the rebellious noble, but a woman fully committed to her cause. "I will not be silent while our people are sold like livestock to maintain the comfort of the elite." She activated her own projector, adding shipping manifests, medical records, and communication logs to the growing display of evidence. For decades, the Zaphirian Empire has exported its own citizens to alien breeding programs, justified by lies about genetic diversity and noble sacrifice. Citizens who questioned this system were labeled as mentally ill or socially deviant. Those who resisted were broken through corrective education or simply disappeared. The assembly was in chaos now. Several representatives were frantically checking their own records while others demanded immediate investigations. The holographic evidence continued to scroll past, each document more damning than the last. Admiral Mordak made a desperate attempt to regain control. "This is sedition. Princess Kithara has been mentally unstable for years, influenced by human propaganda." "Then explain this," Kithara interrupted, projecting her own medical records. "Explain why my instability only manifested when I began questioning these programs. Explain why my behavioral problems coincided exactly with my discovery of shipping schedules listing palace servants as genetic resources." She turned to face the assembly directly, her voice carrying across the vast space without amplification. "I renounce my title, my inheritance, and my place in the Zaphirian nobility. I choose to stand with those who value justice over order, freedom over stability, and truth over comfortable lies." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. Applause, starting from the sections where younger species sat, spreading to include representatives from worlds that had long chafed under the Alliance's rigid hierarchies. "Admiral," Mordek's face had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a shade of purple that suggested imminent violence. "You have destroyed yourself for nothing, you foolish child. Even if the Assembly believes these lies, they will never risk the stability of the Alliance for the sake of abstract justice." "Won't they?" asked a new voice from the Assembly floor. Ambassador Chen Wei of the Terra Colonial Authority stood, her elderly features set with determination. "The human delegation moves for immediate suspension of all Alliance members implicated in these crimes, pending full investigation by an independent tribunal." "Seconded," called Representative Thorne of the Centauri Federation. "Thirded," added the Altarian delegate. Within minutes, the hall was filled with voices calling for justice, investigation, and reform. The comfortable order that had governed galactic politics for centuries was cracking, and through those cracks something new was beginning to emerge. James made his way through the chaos to where Kithara stood, isolated now from her former people, but somehow more radiant than ever. When he reached her, she smiled with pure joy. "We did it," she breathed. "We actually did it. We started it," James corrected, pulling her into his arms. "The real work begins now." Around them, the galaxy was changing. The Zaphirian Empire would fall, along with several other Alliance powers. New forms of government would emerge, based on principles of individual worth and species equality that Kithra's grandmother had dreamed of decades ago. It would be messy, chaotic, and dangerous. There would be resistance from entrenched powers, violence from those who preferred the old ways, and the constant challenge of building something better from the ruins of what came before. But as James kissed the woman who had chosen justice over safety, revolution over comfort, and love over the approval of her people, he knew they had chosen correctly. Humanity would earn its place in the galaxy, not as subordinate clients of established powers, but as partners in creating a civilization worthy of all its citizens. In the viewing galleries, younger members of various species watched the proceedings with growing excitement. Change was coming, led by an unlikely pair, a human diplomat and an alien princess who had dared to believe that love could be stronger than law and justice more important than order. 3 months later, James stood on the observation deck of CAB, the New Horizon, humanity's first diplomatic vessel designed for long-range galactic missions. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the swirling nebula that marked the boundary between the old Alliance territories and the newly declared Free Worlds Coalition, a growing confederation of species that had chosen reform over tradition. Kithra approached from behind, her footsteps silent on the polished deck plating. She had traded her royal robes for the practical uniform of a coalition diplomatic attaché, though she still moved with the fluid grace of Zaphirian nobility. Her skin had settled into a warm silver tone, flecked with blue. What he had learned was her natural coloration when she wasn't stressed or angry. "The morning reports," she said, handing him a data tablet. 17 more worlds have petitioned to join the coalition this week. The Andromedan Collective is requesting a formal alliance treaty, and the Rigel Syndicate wants to establish trade protocols. James scanned the reports, marveling at how quickly their desperate gamble had snowballed into a galactic revolution. "Any word from Earth?" "President Martinez sends her congratulations on the successful mediation of the Vegan territorial dispute. She also wants to know when you're planning to come home for that medal ceremony they keep trying to schedule." "And your people?" Kithara's expression grew more complex. "The provisional government on Zephyr Prime has formally requested coalition membership. They've abolished the caste system and released all records of the trafficking programs. Admiral, Mordak and the old Imperial Council are being held for trial by the Galactic Justice Tribunal." She moved to stand beside him at the viewing port, her reflection ghostly in the transparent surface. "There are still holdout worlds, systems that preferred the old ways. Some of my people see me as a traitor who destroyed their ancient culture for the sake of alien ideologies." James slipped his arm around her waist, feeling the familiar electric tingle of contact between human and Zaphirian nervous systems. "Do you regret it?" "Never." Her answer was immediate and fierce. "Even if we had failed, even if they had silenced us both, it would have been worth it to know that someone, somewhere, stood up and said, 'This is wrong,' when everyone else accepted it as normal." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly past as the ship maintained its course toward the Coalition's newest member world, a small planet whose people had just overthrown their hereditary monarchy and requested assistance in establishing a representative government. "James," Kithara said eventually, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had simply done what they expected? Reported me as reformed, accepted humanity's subordinate membership, played the game by their rules?" He considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. Humanity would have been safer, certainly. Your people might have avoided the chaos of regime change. Billions of beings across the galaxy would still be living under systems we now know were corrupt. But they would be stable systems. But comfort built on injustice isn't really comfort at all. It's just delayed catastrophe. The Zaphirian Empire was already beginning to collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The trafficking programs were becoming harder to hide. The rigid castes were producing economic inefficiency, and younger generations were starting to question the old assumptions. We didn't create that pressure. We just provided a way for it to be released constructively instead of explosively." Kithara turned in his arms, her violet eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the viewport. "And us? Do you ever regret that our relationship began as a political assignment?" James cupped her face in his hands, marveling as always at the way her crystalline skin seemed to glow in response to his touch. "Never. Because what we have now isn't about politics or diplomacy or species alliances. It's about two people who chose each other, chose to build something beautiful together in the middle of a galaxy that sometimes seems determined to tear everything apart." She smiled, the expression transforming her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "I love you, James Rivera, not because you were assigned to reform me, not because you helped me achieve my political goals, but because you saw me as a person worth knowing when everyone else saw only a problem to be solved. I love you too, Kithara Veltar." Former princess, current revolutionary future architect of a better galaxy. Their kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise rather than desperation. Around them, the ship hummed with quiet efficiency, carrying them toward their next assignment in a galaxy that was slowly learning to value justice over order, freedom over stability, and love over law. In the months and years that followed, historians would debate the exact moment when the old galactic order began to crumble. Some would point to the public revelation of the trafficking programs, others to the mass resignations that followed Admiral Mordak's arrest. Political scientists would analyze voting patterns and alliance structures, searching for the precise tipping point that transformed rebellion into revolution. But James and Kithra knew the truth. Change had begun the moment a human diplomat chose to see an alien princess as a person rather than a problem, and she chose to trust him with her deepest truths. Everything else, the evidence, the ceremony, the coalition, the new governments rising across the galaxy, had simply been the inevitable result of two people deciding that love was stronger than fear, and that some things were worth fighting, for even when victory seemed impossible. The galaxy was vast and complex, full of species with different values, different needs, different dreams for the future. There would always be conflicts to mediate, injustices to address, and systems to reform. But for the first time in millennia, there was also hope. The kind of hope that came from knowing that change was possible, that oppression was not inevitable, and that sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you could find someone to stand beside you as you tried to make the universe a little bit better than you found it. As the New Horizon jumped to hyperspace, carrying its crew toward their next diplomatic mission, James and Kithara stood together at the viewport, watching the stars stretch into lines of light. Behind them lay a galaxy in transformation. Ahead lay infinite possibilities, and between them, strong enough to bridge the gap between species and cultures and worlds, lay a love that had already proven it could change everything. The end.